The wind across the Montana plains carried dust, silence, and the sound of a girl's sobs. 17-year-old Clara Mayfield clutched the frayed hem of her dress, standing outside the small wooden chapel where her life had just been traded away for 3 cows, a wagon, and a promise that her family would eat through winter. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. Her mother had cried all night but said nothing. And now Clara belonged to a man old enough to be her grandfather. Thomas Granger was a rancher, gay-bearded, broad-shouldered, quiet as the land he worked. He'd buried 2 wives and had no children. Folks called him Old Tom, and though he was known to be fair, his loneliness had hardened into something like stone. Clara remembered how his hands trembled when he lifted her veil, as if afraid the girl before him might vanish if he blinked. She didn't vanish. She just froze like a bird in a storm while the preacher's words sealed her fate. The wagon ride to his ranch felt endless. The sky stretched open above her, cruelly beautiful, mocking her tears. Tom didn't speak much. When he finally did, his voice was steady, not unkind. "You'll have your own room. You'll want for nothing." Claire only nodded. The words, "your own room," echoed in her chest. He wasn't taking her for love, maybe not even for companionship, just someone to cook, to keep the silence away. The Granger Ranch was miles from town, a lonely spread of land that looked older than time itself. The porch creaked under Clara's feet as she stepped inside. The house smelled of tobacco and pine soap. A faded photograph of Tom's late wife hung on the wall, watching her with calm eyes. "You can call me Tom," he said, setting down her trunk. "Dinner's at 6. You don't have to fear me, Clara." But fear wasn't the right word for what she felt. It was emptiness, a hollow that went deeper than tears. That first night she lay awake, listening to the wind beat against the shutters. She heard Tom moving around, the floorboards sighing under his boots. No doors slammed, no roughness came, just quiet. She'd braced herself for cruelty, but none came. Days turned into weeks. Clara rose before dawn to light the stove, milk the cow, wash the linens. Tom worked sunup to sundown, barely speaking, but always leaving a small piece of cornbread or dried apples by her plate. Little gestures that made her wonder if beneath that rough skin, the man still had a heart that could feel. One morning she found him in the barn, kneeling beside a newborn calf that wasn't breathing. His calloused hands worked gently, rubbing life into it until the creature gasped and moved. The tenderness in that moment caught her off guard. "You saved it," she whispered. He looked up, eyes soft beneath the brim of his hat. Sometimes all a soul needs someone who won't give up. It was the first time she smiled since her wedding. As the snow began to fall, Clara discovered small freedoms. Walking along the frozen creek, humming to herself, reading old books Tom kept in a dusty trunk. He'd been teaching her to read better, tracing letters with his thick fingers while she mouthed each word. "You're smart, Clara." "Smarter than most I've known," he said one night. She blushed, unsure why his approval felt warm. The townsfolk whispered about them. "That poor girl." Some said she'll run off come spring, but others noticed how she'd started laughing again, how Tom's shoulder seemed lighter. There was something shifting in that house, a slow, gentle thaw. One evening she baked him an apple pie from the last of their supplies. When he tasted it, he chuckled low. "Haven't had something this good since Martha was alive?" He paused, looking almost guilty. "She'd have liked you?" That night, Clara wept quietly, not from sorrow but confusion. The man she'd feared was beginning to feel like home. She hated herself for it, for wanting to understand him. Yet when she caught him humming an old tune while mending the fence, something in her chest softened. One stormy afternoon, she slipped on the icy path near the barn and twisted her ankle. Before she could cry out, Tom was there, lifting her like she weighed nothing. "You're hurt," he muttered, worry flashing in his gray eyes. He set her by the fire, his rough hand trembling as he wrapped her foot. "You should have called me." She winced but smiled faintly. You don't like being called for much." He laughed a deep, rusty sound. "You're not wrong." From that day on, Tom insisted she rest, bringing her tea, fixing meals himself in clumsy fashion. She teased him gently. "Didn't know ranchers could cook?" He grinned. "Didn't know girls could make silence feel good." Something unspoken grew between them, fragile and frightening. At night she'd hear him by the fire, reading aloud softly from her books, as if trying to learn what she loved. When their eyes met, there was warmth like a sunrise after a long winter. By spring, Clara's ankle healed, and with it, her fear. She began planting flowers outside the porch, small bursts of color against the dust. Tom built her a little garden fence without her asking. "You said you liked daisies," he murmured. She did, and when the first ones bloomed, she cried into his chest, realizing for the first time she wasn't crying from loss, but from life returning. The night before her 18th birthday, she sat by the window, watching fireflies flicker over the fields. Tom joined her, holding 2 cups of warm cider. "Didn't think I'd see this house come alive again," he said softly. "You did that, Clara." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "And you didn't give up on me." He reached out, hesitated, then brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Wasn't about giving up. It was about waiting for something worth waiting for." Her heart fluttered, uncertain, but she didn't pull away. Outside, the night stretched wide and gentle. The ranch that once felt like a cage now felt like a place where both of them, broken, mismatched, forgotten by the world, might just learn what it means to begin again. And as dawn broke over the plains, Clara realized something no one in town would ever believe. She was no longer the poor young girl forced to marry an old man. She was a woman finding love where no one. Summer rolled in with a vengeance, the kind that cracked the earth and tested every living thing on the land. Clara worked beside Tom under the blazing sun, sweat streaking her temples as she hauled buckets to water the garden he'd built for her. The ranch had never looked better. Fences stood straight, crops thrived, and the laughter that once sounded foreign now came naturally from her lips. Yet deep down she sensed something stirring in Tom, something he fought to hide. He'd been coughing more lately, and when she pressed him about it, he waved it off with that same stubborn smile. "Just dust, Clara. Nothing that'll take me down." But she wasn't convinced. One night she found him outside, clutching his side and gasping quietly, trying not to wake her. "Tom," she whispered, running to him. "You're sick," he straightened, forcing a breath. "No, girl, I'm just getting old." "You're more than that," she said fiercely. "You're everything keeping this place alive." His eyes glistened in the moonlight. "Maybe, but you're the reason I want to stay alive." He rarely said things like that, but when he did, they landed deep, right where her fear used to live. She stayed up late after that, watching him from the porch, realizing how time was a thief and love was its only ransom. When the nearest town doctor finally came, his face turned grim after listening to Tom's chest. "He needs rest, clean air, and less ranch work. He's worn his lungs near out." Clara's throat tightened. "Is it bad?" The doctor sighed. "He's got more heart than most men, but not much time if he keeps pushing." Tom brushed it aside when she told him, "We don't stop just because the wind turns cold." She glared through tears. "You will if I have to tie you to that chair." He laughed weakly. "You sound like Martha did." Then she was a wise woman. He reached for her hand. "She was, and so are you." Weeks passed. Clara managed the ranch more, learning things she never thought she could. Roping, branding, keeping ledgers, driving cattle with grit and grace. The men who'd mocked Tom for marrying her began to nod in respect when they saw her ride by. She had changed, but so had he. The loneliness that once haunted his face had melted into quiet pride. Every evening they'd sit together, her hand in his as the sun sank behind the hills. One evening while she read aloud, he stopped her mid-sentence. "Clara, do you ever wish things had been different?" She thought about her past, the fear, the shame, and shook her head. If they were, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have you. He smiled faintly. You deserve more than this, old fool. Don't you dare say that, she whispered, pressing his hand to her heart. You gave me a life. Maybe not the one I wanted, but the one I needed. He looked at her then with something like awe, as if realizing she wasn't the girl he'd married, but the woman he'd been waiting his whole life for. As autumn came, his health declined, but his spirit didn't. He'd sit by the fire carving little wooden figures for her garden while she cooked and told him stories about the future she dreamed of. One night she told him she wanted to start taking in orphan children from the nearby town. Kids with no home, no family. We've got enough heart in this house for more than two, she said. He smiled softly. You always were the kind that gives light. They took in the first child before winter, a thin boy named Samuel, who barely spoke. Tom taught him how to mend fences, how to tie knots, how to stand tall. The boy followed him everywhere. Watching them, Clara felt her chest ache with something deeper than love. It was belonging. But fate, as always, tested them. One night, a fierce blizzard swept across the plains. The roof groaned. The wind screamed like a living thing. Tom insisted on checking the barn to make sure the animals were safe. I'll go, Clara said, grabbing her shawl. He shook his head. You stay with the boy. I'll be quick. He didn't return quickly. When the storm calmed, Clara went out, heart pounding, lantern flickering in the snow. She found him collapsed near the barn door, half buried in white, the lantern broken beside him. Tom! She screamed, dragging him inside, her tears freezing on her cheeks. He was breathing, barely. She wrapped him in every blanket they had, holding him close, whispering, Don't you leave me, not now. His eyes fluttered open, soft and full of peace. I told you I'd give you a life, Clara. You gave me more. You're not dying. She choked out. You hear me? You're not. He smiled faintly. Then let me rest a bit before living again. He survived that night, weaker but alive, and the town called it a miracle. Through spring, Clara nursed him back, reading to him, laughing with him, refusing to let the ranch fall silent again. Samuel grew stronger, and so did the family they built. One morning, as the sun rose over the fields, Tom took her hand. You remember when I said I regretted waiting so long? She nodded, eyes shining. Well, he whispered, I don't regret anything anymore. She leaned in, tears of joy blurring her sight. Me neither. Years later, after Tom passed peacefully in his sleep, the ranch remained alive. The flowers she planted still bloomed. The children they'd taken in still called her Ma. And the townsfolk spoke of Clara Granger as the woman who turned an old man's loneliness into legend. When asked how she did it, she'd smile and say, Love isn't about age or time. It's about finding someone who sees your worth before you do. And when the wind blew across the plains carrying the scent of daisies and woodsman smoke, it felt like Tom was still there, watching over her, proud of the girl who once was forced to marry and became the woman no one expected her to be. Because sometimes the most unexpected love stories aren't written by fate. They're built one heartbeat, one kindness, one miracle at a time.